The Washington Commanders are projected to win as many as 12 games or more in 2025, despite facing the NFL's third largest rest day disadvantage, a brutal midseason stretch. That and more right now on Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome inside today's episode of Locked On Commanders. I am your host, David Harrison, here with you all week long, your friend, your eyes, your ears on the ground, covering the Washington Commanders, doing so for WUSA9.com, your local CBS affiliate in the DMV, and also doing it for Sports Illustrated's CommanderGameDay.com. Want to thank you for coming through for today's episode, starting the week off, talking a little bit more about the NFL schedule, diving a little bit deeper into it, looking to find a roadmap to the postseason, which of course then could lead to the Super Bowl. The Commanders potentially getting 10 or more wins for the second straight season, a late run in the NFC East to cap off the regular season, and 4 bye weeks that are going to make a difference in the 2025 NFL season for the Washington Commanders. Everydayers, those of you who come through every single day, I want to give you a special thank you for coming through yet again today. If you're not already, please subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you are listening to this podcast right now. If you're new to the show, I want to thank you for finding us, for giving it a try. Locked On Commanders is a daily podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So make sure you come back again and check us out soon. So a path to the Super Bowl for the Washington Commanders has 3 steps in it, and that's how we're going to break this thing down. First off, obviously, you have to make the playoffs. The second thing you'd like to do is win the NFC East division. Division winners tend to have a little bit of a better path to the playoffs, although NFL owners are reportedly going to consider shifting those things just a little bit. And then third, you have to overcome obstacles, right? You've got to be able to overcome a lot of obstacles. We saw the Washington Commanders do the first step, make the playoffs last year, increasing their win total from 4 in 2023 to 12 in 2024. They get to the postseason, and we've always said here on the program, you just got to get to the tournament. That's ultimately goal number 1 for the regular season. Get to the tournament. Once you get into the tournament, anything that can happen. The Commanders get a game-winning field goal on the road against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, go into Detroit, 5 takeaways against that Detroit Lions offense, and win the divisional round playoff matchup against the number 1 seed in the NFC. Then they go into Philadelphia, and that's where their own mistakes cost them. They turned the ball over a handful of times. A lot of things happening there. The Eagles, don't want to take too much credit away from them. Certainly a good team, certainly deserved that victory, but the Washington Commanders not helping out their own causes in the NFC Championship game. Of course, the Eagles go on to win the Super Bowl. So how do they get back to the playoffs, the Washington Commanders? Well, the Commanders currently over-under is set at 9.5 wins on FanDuel. I remember coming into last season, the over-under was 7.5 wins. I told you, take the over. All the confidence in the world, take the over on the 7.5 wins. 9.5 wins, I'm still going to tell you to take the over. I'm just not going to be as confident. I'm still pretty confident. I think this team can get to at least 10 wins here. And how are we going to break this down? So the way we did this last year, I thought it really resonated well. We broke the schedule down into 3 categories. Talking about playoff teams, and then, of course, would be playoff teams that made the playoffs in 2024. Talking about non-playoff teams that had winning records. And then we're talking about teams that had losing records and kind of the win share you needed against each of those to reach that goal of 10 games, or 10 wins. So in 2025, the Washington Commanders are facing 8 playoff teams. Now, that includes the Eagles twice, the Lions, the Vikings, the Packers, the Chiefs, the Chargers, and the Broncos. All of those teams made the NFL playoffs in 2024. They're facing 1 team in 2025 that had a winning record last year but did not make the postseason, that being the Seattle Seahawks. And they've got 8 games against teams that had losing records last year. The Cowboys twice, the Giants twice, the Bears, Falcons, Dolphins, and the Raiders. And if you look at how the Commanders did against these 3 groups in 2024 and extrapolate that data to 2025, then you might get a little bit more confidence in hitting that over if you are a wagering person like I am. So 2024 win percentages against playoff teams, the Commanders went 1-4 against teams that ended up in the postseason, a 200 winning record. They had a 1-0 record against teams that finished with a winning record but did not make the postseason, so 100% win record there. And they had a 10-1 record against teams that had losing records last season, So a .909 winning record. Ended up, the Washington Commanders did with the second easiest schedule in the National Football League last year when you look at the end of season win-loss stats. Of course, strength of schedule right now for 2025, you're using last year's win-loss records at the end of the season. You'll look back at how the year went, reshuffle them. The Commanders ended up with the second easiest schedule. Of course, they also helped some of those teams lose those games that ended up making the schedule look easier, right? So if those win percentages hold up again this year against an admittedly tougher schedule, then they're going to go projected they're going to have a 2-6 record in those 8 games against playoff teams. They're going to have a 1-0 record against the team that had the winning record that didn't make the postseason, which would be the Seattle Seahawks. And you're going to have a 7-1 record against teams that had losing records last year, finishing with a total record of 10-7. So if the Commanders basically do as well against these 3 classes of teams on their schedule as they did last year, they're going to hit that 10-win mark, gives you that 9.5 line. So it gives you a little bit more confidence going over. Of course, if you're going to go over the 9.5, you would love to have 11, 12 wins right on the docket. We'll get to that here in just a little bit. So where could the Washington Commanders, you look at their schedule, where could they lose some ground? Where could they gain some ground? We're going to start with gaining some ground. I think the first game, you talk about these playoff games, right? So these teams against these games against playoff teams. I've got 3 games against playoff teams where you could see the Washington Commanders get a win because of some contextual circumstances going on with these teams. Starting off with the Detroit Lions, they've got 2 brand new coordinators. The last time we saw an NFC caliber playoff team enter the season with 2 brand new coordinators was the Philadelphia Eagles just a couple years ago. And that first year having 2 brand new coordinators did not go well. They ended up firing both coordinators, and they ended up bringing in new coordinators, Kellen Moore, Vic Fangio. Of course, that went a lot better, unfortunately for us, unfortunately for the Philadelphia Eagles. So for the Detroit Lions, they bring in they lose offensive coordinator Ben Johnson. He's now the head coach of the Chicago Bears. They lose defensive coordinator Aaron Glenn, who's now the head coach of the New York Jets. They bring in offensive coordinator John Morton, who was last the Denver Broncos pass game coordinator for 2023 and 2024 seasons. From a production standpoint, a fairly mid-level offense the past 2 seasons in passing and scoring and in rushing. Now, again, the personnel matters, the fit matters, all that kind of stuff, right? You've got a more aggressive head coach in Campbell. So it's not going to be an apples-to-apples comparison, but fairly mid-offense. Defensive coordinator for the Lions now is Kelvin Shepard, a homegrown, in-house grown, developed coach. Lions linebacker coach from 2022 to 2024. Previous to that, he was the outside linebackers coach in 2021. I think the thing that stands out about Kelvin Shepard especially is he's never been a coordinator. At least John Morton has been a Broncos pass game coordinator, so he's had a hand in the coordinating. Now, again, how much he learned on the job there in Detroit with Aaron Glenn will determine how successful he is. But the bottom line is the Detroit Lions, yes, number 1 seed in the NFC last year when healthy, certainly one of the better teams in the NFL, and the talent is certainly still there as well. But we've seen it before. Coaching absolutely matters. Coordinating absolutely matters. And the Detroit Lions having 2 new coordinators, not a small thing. Just not sure how big of a thing it's going to be. But if it has any sort of impact on this game or on the season for the Detroit Lions, then that's an area where you could look at the Washington Commanders potentially coming in as underdogs and coming out with the victory. Another one on the road against the Minnesota Vikings. I think if you got the Commanders and Vikings rosters stacked up, I think most of the national pundits, personally, I like the Commanders roster, but I think most of your national people would probably try to give it a push. Since it's in Minnesota, you might be looking at them getting a little bit of an edge here. Expected to start J.J. McCarthy this year, the second-year quarterback, but second-year quarterback without a whole lot of experience because he tore his right meniscus in his first preseason game. Had a slight setback in November during his recovery, but he's gotten plenty of mental reps, not as many physical ones. So everybody learns a little bit differently. How much JJ is going to be able to turn those physical or those mental reps into physical process or progress once he is able to hit the field again this training camp is going to be the key. Also, defensive coordinator Brian Flores, very, very, very blitz happy. Jaden Daniels, one of the best quarterbacks against the blitz in 2024. And Coach Flores doesn't really shift his approach for his opponent. So if that pattern stays true, the Commanders will have some opportunities to take advantage of a very aggressive Vikings defense. And then again, another area they can gain at the Eagles at the end of the year. It's an end-of-year scenario. If the Philadelphia Eagles have already clinched the division, they've already shown under Nick Sirianni, they're going to sit. Weeks 1 through 12, the Washington Commanders play 4 divisional games. Playing Washington late could actually backfire on the NFL when you look at the Eagles because The Eagles are going to play 7 non-playoff or losing record teams before they see the Commanders even one time. By the time we get to that Week 18 finale that the NFL is probably hoping is going to be this grand divisional finale game, it could already be over. And you're looking at the Washington Commanders going into Philadelphia. And yeah, it might be because Saquon's sad or Jalen's sad or whatever. But at the end of the day, if it gets the Commanders another win, it gets Commanders another win. If the division or positioning is on the line, and the Commanders come away with plus 3 days rest advantage against the Eagles in Week 18, the second highest rest advantage of the season. That, coupled with a short travel time, is a big plus. And the Eagles are going to be coming off of a road trip to Buffalo as well. Where could they lose ground? Well, the New York Giants have Russell Wilson, a +8 margin of victory in 2 games against the New York Giants 2024. Not going to elicit a lot of confidence from Commanders fans. You also look at the Dallas Cowboys. No Dak Prescott the 2 times that the Commanders played the Cowboys in 2024. The Cowboys invested in the offensive line this year. They got George Pickens. So certainly you could look at Dallas being a better team this year. And the Las Vegas Raiders, this 2025 Raiders is not going to be your 2024 Raiders that won only 4 games. In fact, if I have to pick who could be the 2025 Commanders, it would be the Las Vegas Raiders. So 3 games there that you could potentially fall into a trap again this season. So it's going to be really interesting. But the first step, make the playoffs, win those 10, 11. If you can get to 12 wins, that'd be great. If you also could win the division, a roadmap to winning the division for the Washington Commanders coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you by Skylight Frames, who brings you the Skylight calendar. Say goodbye to sticky notes, scribbled plans on the fridge, and overlapping calendar invites. The Skylight calendar is here to bring clarity to the chaos and help families like yours stay organized without all of the stress. This sleek digital display syncs with your existing calendars like Google, Apple, Outlook, and more, making it simple to track appointments, practices, dinners, and reminders all in one easy-to-see place. How great would it be to eliminate the I didn't know excuse from your family's routine? You can assign color codes to every single member of your family, so it eliminates the who does what confusion in your house. So right now, Skylight is offering our listeners $30 off their 15-inch calendars by going to skylightcal.com/NFL. Go to skylightcal.com/NFL for $30 off your 15-inch calendar. That's skylightcal.com/NFL. Continuing now with today's episode of Locked On Commanders, looking at the Washington Commanders schedule a little bit deeper. How can they get to the 10-win mark? Hopefully more wins, right? But how can they get to at least the 10-win mark to get themselves into the postseason, or at least make sure you're in contention to make the postseason? Step number 2 would be to win the division. And it's kind of ironic that we put it this way, because most people, most GMs, most coaches would tell you that the first thing you want to do is win the division, right? Like that's what you're coming out here. If you're the Washington Commanders, you look at the Philadelphia Eagles sitting atop the division. You lost 2 of the 3 games you played against them. They end up winning the Super Bowl. Every team in the NFL is chasing the Super Bowl champion. So when the Super Bowl champion is also your division champion, and it's a team that you lost to 2/3 of the time, it really gives you a lot of motivation to kind of aim your strategy at catching up with them. And certainly I think the Washington Commanders did a lot there. So usually that's kind of the first goal, right? How do we catch up? How do we catch up and surpass the division champion on our way to trying to win the Super Bowl? That's usually the main priority of the focus. So put that as step 2, just a little bit different. But again, like I said, you just need to be in the tournament, and to be in the tournament, you don't have to win the division. That's why we order it the way that we did. However, to get the win in the division, to get the division title, to make sure the NFC East streak of not having back-to-back division champs continues, the Commanders are going to have division matchups twice in the first 7 weeks. They're going to have none in the next 7 weeks, and then 4 in the last 4 weeks of the NFL season. So you're going to start off with a little taste of NFC East action, and you're just going to be drinking from an NFC East fire hose at the end of it. Opening weekend against the New York Giants, not a lot to say there. Obviously, Russell Wilson, Malik Neighbors, Tyrone Tracy Jr., that defense has always been solid, remains to be solid, was solid last year, which is part of the reason that even though the Commanders swept the Giants last year, 2 wins and 2 tries, they only had an 8-point advantage in the overall scoring differential. So you look at that situation, you say if the Giants are even a little bit improved from their version last year, then that makes that a little bit harder to maintain. Now, of course, the Commanders also hoping to improve. So you're hoping that you at least did enough to keep that gap between you and the Giants there. Russell Wilson, not a great quarterback these days. Not, certainly probably not definitely not top 5, probably not even top 10 in the NFL these days, but an upgrade, I think, over Daniel Jones, over what the New York Giants had in the past. So I do think Russell Wilson makes them better. How much better is yet to be seen, and we'll find out a little bit opening weekend. Now, the trick here is you get the New York Giants before they have a lot of opportunity to hit the ground in real game, real scenario activities. They're going to have some preseason action, obviously, but the real thing starts in the regular season. The Commanders are going to know who they are more than the Giants are going to know who they are. Certainly gives you the advantage in that week 1 matchup. The next time you get an NFC East team comes in week 7. So from week 1 to week 7, you don't get any NFC East action, and then you have a -1 rest day disadvantage. You have 1 fewer rest day when you go into Dallas to face the Cowboys. So not only do you have 1 fewer rest day, but you also have a travel day. You know what I mean? So if you want to kind of count that as another one, the Commanders will be coming off of a Monday night home game against the Chicago Bears. The Dallas Cowboys are going to be coming off of a Sunday afternoon game in Carolina. So that -1 day is a full, it's more than 24 hours. It's more like 30, 32 hours. And then, like I said, you have to travel to Dallas. So there is going to be a little bit of a disadvantage there from a rest standpoint, all those things facing the Dallas Cowboys. And of course, it's in Dallas. It is the Cowboys, always a tough matchup, even without Dak Prescott on the field like he hasn't been in some of the more recent matchups. So that is certainly going to be a tough one. But if you can come out of Dallas with that week 7 win, then it's certainly going to set you up much better. You'd love to go 2-0 in the NFC East heading into week 15, because from week 7 to week 15, we have no NFC East matchups. That is when the third game comes and you're going back to New York. You're going to face again the New York Giants, this time in New York with a 6-day rest day disadvantage. The New York Giants are going to be coming off their bye week in week 14. The Giants getting the latest bye in the NFL, and Commanders fans, the Washington Commanders, they know exactly what that feels like. So you also understand that by the time you get to that week 14 bye, it's almost more like thank goodness than it is relaxing, right? Like it's almost like a need versus a want, and that's, you kind of get over the hump on how beneficial that is. 1 of 3 games this year coming off a bye week. So we talk about those 4 bye weeks that are important. Obviously, the Commanders bye week is important, but then you've got 3 games coming against opponents that are coming off their bye weeks. The Giants is the first one here that we're going to talk about. Now, according to Sharp Football Analysis, and if you remember last week, I kind of shared some insight from Sharp Football Analysis, really great site. But according to Sharp Football Analysis, quote, back before the 2011 collective bargaining agreement, this scheduling issue would have mattered more. We're talking about the playing opponents coming off of a bye. The 2011 CBA introduced mandatory days off for teams on bye weeks, allowing players to fall out of their routines and become distracted. Data has clearly shown a drop-off in production post-bye as of late, end quote. Now, players have to have 4 days off during the bye weeks ever since that 2011 CBA. Before that, they didn't have to have a minimum of any days off. Since 2011, teams coming off bye weeks have won just 52.3% of their games. Still over 50%, but before 2011, they were winning 55.7%. So a full 3.4%, call it, more than they are since then. Now, the Giants are 2-1 following the bye since Brian Daboll was hired in 2022. They beat the pre-CJ Stroud Texans in 2022, beat the Packers in 2023, lost to the Buccaneers in 2024. Overall, their scoring differential, though, is -13 points. So even though they have a winning record following their bye weeks, the scoring differential paints a picture of this is not going to be, the Giants aren't going to come into this thing and be like, oh, man, we're coming off a bye. The Commanders aren't. This is going to be such a huge advantage. And it's not a long trip for the Commanders to go up to New Jersey. So, again, when the time comes, hopefully remember this. But don't give the fact the Giants coming off the bye as much, I would say, as much, not no weight, but as much weight as we usually do. Week 16 against the Eagles, home game after a short travel away game for the Washington Commanders. The Commanders were 500 in games turning the ball over last year, 750 in games where they didn't turn it over last year. Clearly, this is not revolutionary or going to blow anybody's mind, but not turning the ball over, very key to winning. 6 of their 16 regular season turnovers in 2024 came against the Philadelphia Eagles. That's nearly 40% of their giveaways coming up against the Eagles. You clean up the turnovers, the odds of beating the Eagles go up. I know it's simple to say, but obviously when you have 40% of your turnovers against one team, it's something that still needs to be said. Week 17 against the Dallas Cowboys on Christmas Day. The Cowboys are traveling into your home. You have a rest day advantage this time. The Cowboys are coming off a home game against the Chargers, so it's kind of like the reverse against Dallas Cowboys early in the season. The Commanders have the one-day rest day disadvantage. Here later on in the season, the Cowboys have the rest day disadvantage, so it all evens out in the end. And then finally, Week 18 at Philadelphia, +3 rest days for the Washington Commanders thanks to that Christmas Day game, final week of the year. And the Eagles face the Bills. The Eagles' last 3 games of the year had on the road against the Commanders, on the road against the Bills, and then at home against the Commanders. That is a tough road to sled. So again, the Commanders, I feel like, are going to come in with a pretty significant advantage against the Philadelphia Eagles in that Week 18 game. Plus, if the Eagles do have the division wrapped up, probably not going to play all their starters, which means the Commanders are going to have an easier, not a guaranteed, but an easier path to victory. If the Commanders split with each team, let's say the Commanders go 500 in the NFC East, that's one of the 2 wins you need against 2024 playoff teams and 2 of the 7 you need against teams with losing records. So even if they split in the division, still set up pretty good to hit that 10-win mark and challenge to make the postseason for a second straight season. The final ingredient to the roadmap to the Super Bowl, overcoming adversity. That coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Commanders, we're talking about the roadmap to the Super Bowl for the Washington Commanders. First things first, you got to make the playoffs. Second, you love to win the division while you do it. Third, you have to be able to overcome adversity. We saw the Washington Commanders overcome a good amount of adversity in 2024. Ultimately, in the NFC Championship game, that adversity came via turnovers. There was also some adversity via the tush push, but I think it was the adversity over the turnovers more so than anything that the Commanders could not overcome and ultimately led to their season coming to a premature end. So speaking of the bye week advantage, fact or fiction, this is an interesting conversation. The Commanders also play the Seahawks, who come off their bye week in their game, and the Chicago Bears coming off their bye week. Not only the Chicago Bears coming off their bye week, but they're coming off their bye week into a Monday night game. So they get even a little bit of a bonus day to their bye week. Now, the Seahawks won their game coming out of the bye week last year. The Bears lost their game coming out of their bye week last year. Both teams have relatively new coaching staffs. Mike McDonald is going to be in his second season coaching the Seattle Seahawks. Came from Baltimore, a team that was 8-3 coming out of bye. So clearly McDonald comes from a program that knows how to manage the bye week potential slump, right? Ben Johnson, as the offensive coordinator for the Detroit Lions, was 3-2-1 coming out of bye week. So even though the Lions had a lot of success, not a lot of success, or not as much success as you might expect from a team like the Detroit Lions coming out of their bye week. So those are your heavy rest day deficiencies, those 3 games: the Giants, the Seahawks, the Bears. The only other game that the Commanders have a rest day deficiency is that Week 7 matchup against the Dallas Cowboys. It's a 1-day deficiency. So that would lead you to think, okay, well, that means Washington isn't going to have a great advantage coming off their own bye, right? So if I'm going to try to kind of discount the Seahawks, the Bears, the Giants coming off their bye weeks in these games as maybe not as much of an advantage as it used to be, then the other side of the coin, right, you would presume would be true, where Washington wouldn't have as much of an advantage coming off their bye week as the other teams do as well. So they actually have a little bit of an advantage in my opinion, because not only the Washington Commanders coming off their bye week in Week 13 when they host the Denver Broncos, but so too are the Denver Broncos coming off their bye week as well. So you have the opportunity for both teams to potentially get out of their groove, for both players, both sets of players, to potentially get outside of their routines. What it's really going to boil down to is which team is affected by the bye week bug less, and the fact that the Denver Broncos have to travel to the DMV gives the Commanders a little bit of an added edge here. Now, however, Dan Quinn, in his head coaching career, which obviously predates Washington, but also includes last year, is 3-4 after the bye week. Sean Payton, who has been coaching since before 2011, head coaching in the NFL since before 2011, but since 2011, Sean Payton as a head coach is 10-3 coming out of the bye. So clearly Sean Payton knows how to make sure his guys are ready coming out of the post-2011 bye. Dan Quinn doesn't have as great a track record as well. So it kind of gives you that push kind of feeling, right? So if you hear overall that Washington has the 3rd largest rest day deficiency, we talked about that at the top of the show, it is true. The only teams that have more of a rest day deficiency than the Commanders are the New Orleans Saints and the Las Vegas Raiders. But when you take away those bye week influences, there's just 1 week. Granted, it's a big week on the road against Dallas Cowboys, divisional matchup. You definitely want to get that win. So it's not a small week to have a rest day deficiency. But then there's 3 weeks of at least 2 days of rest advantage for the Washington Commanders. And the game that they're coming out of their bye week, where you might have to have that concern of a lull in their routine, they're playing a team that's going to be facing the exact same thing. So you might remember we did a win-loss projection based on just opponents before we had the order of the schedule. Obviously, the order of the opponents matters. That context matters. Now that we had the schedules, I went ahead and I did the same thing again for this episode. I predicted every single game of the season for every team, not just Commanders. And in the end, I have the Commanders coming out with 12 wins, which is more than I had last year. The order of some of these games, I think, is important. They do, however, finish second place in the NFC East. The Eagles also had 12 wins, but they had their 12th win entering Week 17 and did not need a win against the Commanders in Week 18. So, again, we kind of already talked about this. In my projection, I said, you know what, the Eagles, in that situation, they're going to sit their starters. The Commanders are not. They're going to get a better win or a better performance and probably get a win in Week 18 on the road against the Eagles, giving them their 12th win of the season. The Commanders end up in Detroit for the wild card round. The Cowboys also make the playoffs, but they end up traveling to San Francisco for the wild card, and the other matchup in the wild card round, the Green Bay Packers at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. On the AFC side of things, I had the Chiefs coming out number 1, Jaguars at the Bills in the wild card round, Raiders at Bengals, Ravens at Texans. So I actually have the Bengals bouncing back and winning the division. We'll find out just how much Trey Hendrickson plays into that projection once that all kind of gets settled out. The number 1 pick goes in the 2026 NFL draft, ends up with the Indianapolis Colts. Number 2 and 3 go to the Saints and the Browns, respectively. Now, a little bit of, call it rumor, right? There's basically conversation, speculation, rumor, whatever you want to call it. I don't have confirmation on it at this moment, so I'm only going to kind of drop it as a footnote. But there is a possibility that NFL owners are going to vote this month on a proposal to reseed the NFL playoffs. So you would make the NFL playoffs the same way. 4 division winners, 3 wild cards, same as always. However, once you get into the postseason, they would be reseeded by win-loss records. So if the Washington Commanders in this case come up with 12 wins, they would, even though they'd be a wild card team, they would actually end up hosting a playoff game. I believe, if I remember correctly, I don't have the numbers in front of me anymore, I believe they would actually end up hosting the Green Bay Packers in that scenario, if I remember correctly. So interesting to keep an eye on. We'll see if it actually happens. I personally am not for it, but I'm old. I'm old man shakes fist at cloud, all that kind of stuff. I don't really care at the end of the day. If they do it, fantastic. We'll adjust as needed. If they don't, all right. I asked insiders for the toughest stretch in the 2025 NFL season for the Washington Commanders and came up with 3 predominant winners. The overall winner, the NFC East Final Four, at New York Giants, again, home against the Eagles, at home against the Cowboys, on the road against the Eagles to finish the stretch. That got the most wins or the most votes by a large margin. Second place came in, was actually week 8 through 11. Had one voter that was week 8 through 10, but for the most part, it's week 8 through 11 at KC, back home against Seattle, at home against Detroit, and then on the road against Miami and Spain. A lot of people talking about the Seahawks having that winning record last year, but missing the playoffs. Still a very good team. And then Spain on the road, quote unquote. Again, obviously the Dolphins have to travel as well, but those things are always kind of wild card games, right? Week 4 through 8 also got some love because specifically only one home game in that stretch. They're on the road to Atlanta, then all the way to Los Angeles, back home against Chicago, and then on the road to Dallas with that one game rest day deficiency. I agree. I think that's going to be a tough row as well. Weeks 4 through 8 also getting some love. So that's going to complete this schedule breakdown. Of course, we'll talk more about the schedule as we need to. We've got more content coming up here on Locked On Commanders as we continue to get through the week. In the meantime, if you've got questions or comments, we've got a mailbag episode coming up later this week. If you want to be in on that insider mailbag, all you have to do is go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. For your second listen of the day, check out Locked On NFL Scouting. Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino are going to help you stay the most informed NFL fans of the offseason. Find Locked On NFL Scouting on YouTube or wherever you're listening to this podcast. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day, every day, every day. Thanks for coming through every single day. Until we speak again, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind, and I'll see you right back here next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.